Welcome to the IVF Journey with Dr. Michael Chapman, the podcast for couples who struggle with infertility and want to fulfill their dreams of becoming parents. In this podcast, you'll learn actionable strategies to deal with infertility from Dr. Michael Chapman, or Prof as he's affectionately known. Prof is the co-founder of IVF Australia and is a leading Australian infertility specialist who has helped over 3,000 couples realise their dreams of becoming parents. To access previous episodes packed with ideas, solutions and tips that actually work, head over to Dr. Chapman's IVF podcast on iTunes. You can also ask questions by contacting Dr. Chapman's rooms on 1-800-111-483 or by emailing him michael.chapman@ivf.com.au.
That first cry of a baby born after the long journey of IVF remains one of the most beautiful experiences in the world. As an obstetrician and an IVF specialist, I've had the privilege of experiencing this over many thousands of times in my long career, but I still remain moved by each baby's first cry. It signifies the end of a long journey and the beginning of a new life. This is Professor Michael Chapman, co-founder of IVF Australia and host of the IVF Journey podcast. Thanks for tuning in. To access all the previous episodes, head over to my website, www.theivfjourney.com, and select IVF Journey Podcast from the navigation menu. You'll also be able to find the various services that we provide at IVF Australia. Today we're going to talk about the emotional ups and downs of the IVF journey and look in more detail at the supports that you should have when you embark on the journey. When a couple go through IVF, their expectations are high. They want to have a baby. They believe that IVF will get them that baby. And in many cases they'll be right, but not always. The first step in the emotions of IVF is to create in your mind a realistic expectation. Even in the best of hands, in the best possible patients who are under 35, each cycle of IVF is only going to produce a pregnancy in 40 to 50% of couples. So going into a cycle, one must be realistic. But once you're in the cycle and you're starting to take the drugs and you come for your first scan and the nurse tells you that you've got multiple follicles and they're all growing beautifully, somehow, whatever the expectations that you have, as realistic as they might be, suddenly become incredibly optimistic. It's all going well. They ring you with your hormone results and again reassure you that things are going beautifully. And you come back 2 days later and further reinforcement of that expectation, the unrealistic expectation that you're going to be 100% certain you're going to get a baby. Then we get to the day of the trigger injection. They've told you you've got multiple follicles, it's all looking beautiful, so you're ready to go, ready to have those eggs collected. There's an expectation as you go into the procedure room that you're going to get lots and lots of eggs and it's all going to be great. Your hopes continue to rise as your doctor after the procedure tells you that you've got multiple eggs and they look of good quality. The next morning, the scientist rings you to tell you that you've got all these eggs fertilized. It's fantastic. You're going to get there. 5 days later, a beautiful blastocyst is transferred. Again, you are absolutely convinced this is going to be a baby. You see it on the screen as the scientist puts it into that little tube that's going to deposit it in your uterus. You're sure that that's going to be your baby. But then there's 10 days of trauma. Am I? Aren't I? Am I? Aren't I? Should I do this? Should I do that? There's no evidence that anything makes any difference to the outcome, but you try and avoid anything that might interfere with the implantation and growth of your embryo. So day 10 comes, a period hasn't arrived, You go to the clinic, you have a blood test, and you wait, terrified that the answer is going to be no. The phone rings, you rush to the phone, the nurse on the other end of the phone says, "I'm sorry, you're not pregnant." It's like falling off a cliff. You've built up this huge expectation that you're going to be pregnant. And for 50 to 60% of patients, the answer will be no. How do you deal with that crushing message? How do you deal with the next cycle and the one after that? I've found over the years that the couples that do best are those who have realistic expectations, who have close friends or family that they've confided in, who can hold their hand through good and bad times. Within the clinic, there will be a counsellor trained to deal with the ups and downs of infertility, trained to deal with the traumas of IVF and the journey. Use those counsellors, ask about them, make an appointment to see them, and they will help. Research has shown that the stresses of an IVF cycle are amongst the most traumatic in people's lives, more stressful than anything that you can come across in the work environment. It almost ranks in the trauma associated with the death of a relative. So we should use all the support we can get to get us through this and hopefully get a baby. The good news is that while in one cycle, 50 to 60% of couples won't go away with a baby, if they persist, and if you're under 38, over 80% will go home with a baby, but it may take multiple cycles. And getting through those multiple cycles can be a very traumatic journey. I say again, look for support. Don't do it on your own. And don't forget that you can access all the previous episodes by going to our website, www.theivfjourney.com, and select IVF Journey Podcast from the navigation menu.
Thank you for listening to the IVF Journey with Dr. Michael Chapman, the podcast which helps couples negotiate their way through the IVF journey, all the way to parenthood. You can also ask questions by contacting Dr. Chapman's rooms on 1800 111 483 or by emailing him michael.chapman@ivf.com.au.